Had I realized that a single cup of coffee could erase 65 years of respect, I would have stayed tucked in bed that morning. I was sitting peacefully at the breakfast table in my daughter Emily's bright kitchen, holding a warm mug in my hands. She had just brewed a strong pot, the way her husband Ryan preferred it. I believed it would be a calm morning. I felt secure. "Grandma," my grandson Ryan spoke casually, as if requesting me to pass the butter. "Can I borrow your credit card again? There is something I need for my gaming setup, just $5,000, he said. I did not even blink. I simply declined. That was when Emily intervened. She did not shout immediately. Instead, she let silence stretch between us, heavy and suffocating. Then suddenly her hand shot out, not to hit me. No, that would be too bold. But she did something worse. She tipped my coffee cup directly onto my lap. The steaming liquid burned, and I gasped, jumping up as the ceramic shattered on the floor. The hot coffee soaked into my thin pajama pants. My legs stung, and my pride deflated. Emily did not flinch. "If you are going to be selfish, maybe it is time you find somewhere else to stay," she said, crossing her arms as if delivering a firm company rule. "Either give Ryan what he needs or move out. We are not running some kind of charity." That word struck me even harder than the scalding coffee. I stood there, dripping, bruised, and speechless. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought I glimpsed regret, but it was only cold calculation. Being evaluated and deemed inconvenient, $5,000? I repeated with a calm yet shaky voice, considering it too much for a child to spend on gadgets. Emily's lips curled in response. "It's not a big deal. You have the money. You've been sitting on it since Dad passed away." "I don't even understand why you're making this so difficult," I replied quietly. "I've been covering this house's bills, and I have never once asked you to pay for my prescriptions." Her eyes rolled in response. "You're fortunate I allow you to stay here at all. Remember, after your surgery, you couldn't walk without assistance. I've managed your entire life, and now this?" I felt the urge to scream, not only from the physical pain, but also from the feeling of betrayal. They had never been truly supportive. They were manipulating me. Emily's care came with hidden demands that tightened like ropes, invisible at first, but then cutting off circulation. I realized that this was no longer my daughter, not really. This person viewed me as a bargaining chip, a resource, a stubborn old woman who had outlived her purpose. Behind her, Ryan appeared indifferent, still waiting, still expecting the card. My hands trembled as I grabbed a paper towel to blot the liquid running down my legs. No one moved to help. My breath was shallow, and my heart pounded in my ears. Emily crossed her arms and said with that same harsh smirk, "You either give me the card or you're out of here by the end of the day." There it was, not a request, but a demand. I looked down at the spilled coffee spreading around the shattered mug. One of the jagged fragments was right next to my foot, decorated with a floral pattern. I held a piece of something that was once beautiful, much like myself. I did not argue or shed a tear. Instead, I walked slowly to the sink and rinsed my burned hands under cold water, then turned off the faucet. I finally spoke. "I will be gone before sunset." Emily blinked, probably expecting more protest. But what she did not understand, and what I finally realized, was that silence does not equal weakness. Some debts cannot be settled with money, but are paid with quiet resolve and closure. The door clicked softly behind me, leaving me alone in the guest room. My legs still ached, but the true pain did not come from the coffee spill. It came from the painful truth that she truly wanted me gone. It was not because she could no longer afford to care for me, but because I had outlived my usefulness. I sat on the edge of the bed, the very bed where I had slept after my hip surgery. It was the one Emily had lovingly tucked me into every night, at first treating me like a mother rather than a burden. She had insisted I stay with them, calling it a short-term plan. I did not protest. I was blindly thankful. Only now could I see it for the trap it was. She took control of my prescriptions, grocery orders, and bills, all under the guise of convenience. She said she would manage my finances so I could rest. She told the neighbors I was too exhausted to socialize, though she never told me when they stopped by to ask about me, and I let her. I let her strip away my independence little by little. Slowly, I moved toward the closet. My suitcase still sat on the top shelf, dusty yet untouched. I carefully pulled it down, gripping its edge tightly. I leaned against the dresser to steady my aching hip, but I did not wince or groan, even though the pain was familiar. What hurt more than the physical discomfort was knowing that no one knocked on the door, no one came to see if I was all right. Emily had screamed in the kitchen loud enough for the entire block to hear, and Ryan had seen me flinch, freeze, and struggle to find words. Yet neither of them cared enough to come, not enough to ease the pain. I opened the top drawer and took out the envelope I had hidden there many months ago beneath the extra linens. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, insurance cards, and a printout of my bank's routing number. At the time, I did not fully understand why I had hidden them, but now it was clear. Some part of me had always known this moment would arrive. As I packed, I made no noise, no sobbing, no murmurs. I folded each item of clothing carefully, my hands steady. I rolled up my jewelry pouch, which contained nothing but costume pieces and one pearl ring from my late husband. But that ring was mine. From the hallway, I heard the low hum of the television. Emily was back to her normal routine, watching one of those home design shows she always said I would never understand. Ryan was probably in his room, headphones on, likely spending someone else's money online. I zipped the suitcase closed and sat down for a brief moment. My eyes scanned the room. The framed photo of Emily and me at her college graduation was still resting on the dresser. She had insisted I be in the picture. I looked proud then, but I was not proud now. I was awake. The doorknob turned for a moment, then stopped. They heard me packing, but did not care. They were either unable to open it, or perhaps hoping I would vanish without a trace so they would not have to mention it again. They clearly did not understand me at all. I settled back down with my suitcase at my feet, my heart racing as if I were back in an emergency room awaiting a verdict. But I already had my diagnosis. I was not broken. I had simply been cast aside, and that meant I was finally free. I grabbed my phone and scrolled until I reached a name I had not dialed for many months. Gerald M., a retired lawyer, my neighbor, and once a friend, still generous. I pressed call, and he answered on the second ring. "Ruth," he asked, "is everything okay?" I replied with calm but certain words. "No, but it will be." Silence followed my hang-up with Gerald, an unnerving kind of quiet that only settles in homes where love once thrived. I sat back down, one hand resting on my suitcase, the other gracing the edge of the nightstand where my reading glasses usually lay. I had not opened a book in weeks, not since the last time I felt truly like a resident here, instead of just forgotten belongings. That was when I spotted something odd. My purse was lighter than before. I unzipped the front compartment. No wallet, no credit card, no identification. My heart raced as I checked the second and then the third compartments with shaking fingers. Empty. Sitting on the bed's edge, I emptied the contents out. Loose peppermints, tissues, and old lipstick. Nothing. No card, no wallet. I was sure I had it yesterday because I used it to purchase my prescription cream at the pharmacy. Emily had driven me and insisted on coming along. As I slowed down while holding my bag, I believed she was simply being thoughtful, but no, she was actually creating an opening. I could hear her voice clearly now from months ago, so casual at the time. She said, "Let me just handle your bills, Mom." It is easier if everything passes through one account. I will set up automatic payments so you do not have to worry about a thing. You just need to focus on getting better, okay? So I allowed it. I gave her access, passwords, and accounts. I trusted my daughter, Emily, and now I could barely recall the last time I received a bank statement in my name. She had shifted everything to paperless, once again saying it was to make things simpler. How foolish I had been. The feeling struck me like bitter bile rising in my throat. They cared more about my money than about me. I was not family to them, just a figure on a ledger. With slow steps, I went to the dresser and opened the second drawer. Inside, I kept a small notebook, the kind I used for grocery lists when I lived alone. On the last page, months before, I had hastily written down my account numbers just in case. I stared at the familiar digits. They belonged to me. But when was the last time I even saw the matching card? I searched everywhere. The jewelry box, under the mattress, even within my old Bible, but found nothing. They did not simply ask for my money. They took it. I sat down on the bed, feeling dizzy. The sharp flavor of the coffee had faded, replaced by something colder burning within me. A shame that tasted like rust stuck in my throat. What made it even worse was knowing I had allowed it to happen. I had handed over control and told myself this was what had to be. She acted like she was supporting me, but no. She was stepping in front of me, around me, blocking my way. I had not realized it until that very moment. Not when she told the bridge club I was too exhausted to join. Not when she intercepted calls from my bank. Not when she began approving my Amazon purchases as if I were a child. She had been closing doors slowly, one after another, leaving me without any escape. That part almost brought me to tears. I was not weak. I had endured 30 years working in the emergency room, the loss of my husband, and a hip that shattered like fragile glass. But I had not handled this situation with grace. I glanced again at the framed photo of Emily and me, the one from her graduation. She wore that same confident, almost smug smile back then, too, before I understood that some daughters do not grow up to love you in return. They simply grow up to live in your shadow. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Gerald saying, "I'm outside, ready whenever you are." I stared at the screen, then at the invisible fragments of trust scattered throughout the room. Today, I was not only leaving a house, I was walking away from the illusion that I still mattered to her. By the time I opened the front door, Gerald was already halfway up the path, his step calm but purposeful. He wore his familiar navy jacket and carried a sturdy canvas bag, as if we were heading out for a casual picnic. He did not ask any questions. He did not examine me as if I were broken. He simply said, "You ready?" I nodded. Behind me, the house stayed silent, no doors opening, no footsteps rushing to stop me. That quietness was the evidence, the proof they believed I would not leave, that I was incapable of it. Gerald lifted my suitcase and carefully took the smaller bag from my shoulder. "Did you bring everything?" he asked as we got closer to his car. "Everything I still own?" I responded. He opened the front passenger door. "Be careful with your hip." That single phrase nearly shattered me, not because of his kindness, but because it struck me how much time had passed since anyone showed genuine care without expecting something in return. The drive began without words. I watched the streets blur by each corner, taking me farther away from the house that stopped feeling like home the moment Emily began to measure my value like a monthly expense. About halfway through town, Gerald finally broke the silence. "You know," he said, "I saw you crying last week." I blinked. "What?" He did not meet my eyes. Instead, he focused on the road. On the balcony, you sat perfectly still, clutching that little ceramic bird. I did not want to intrude. I did not even remember the bird or the tears. I guess. I began, then stopped. It felt as if I was living a life that wasn't mine, a smaller one. I realized something was wrong. When you stopped coming to the library, that was when I understood the depth of isolation. Emily did not just take my money, she stole my routines, my friendships, my ability to walk a couple of blocks and drink terrible coffee from a paper cup while chatting with the retired choir ladies. She did not imprison me, she simply made connecting with the outside world increasingly difficult. You are not the... At first, I had quietly assisted like this, Gerald said, old people often being controlled wrongly, losing their independence. It happens more times than most want to admit. I said nothing because I was too preoccupied holding back my tears, as if they were travelers who had missed their stop. I made a few calls that morning, Gerald went on. There is a place I believe you will appreciate. A senior community with independent living units. You mentioned before you liked the one with the koi pond. I turned to look at him and said that place is beyond my budget. I had seen the brochures earlier. Emily said it was not practical. Emily also mentioned that you needed help, even with tasks such as picking your socks. He said dryly, "Do not give her control. She never earned it." That made me smile faintly. He reached into the side compartment and took out a thin manila envelope. "Start here. Just some brochures and pamphlets. Oh, and we will also consult a financial protection officer. If what you say about the missing card is true, we might have to act sooner than later." I felt a heavy thump in my chest. Not panic, not fear. Just the sound of the truth settling where it truly belonged. I whispered, "I never wanted it to come to this. She was my daughter." Gerald nodded, slowing the car as we neared the traffic light. "I am sure you loved her dearly, but sometimes love is just the wrapping paper around poison." I looked out the window. Somewhere behind me, Emily may have noticed I had checked out, or perhaps not. Yet, in front of me, for the very first time in a long while, I saw a gate opening. Not a cage, but a door. We arrived at the gates shortly after 11. Golden Pines was the name. The sign was simple, no fancy fonts or decorations, just neat letters on an aged wooden board. Yet the grounds beyond seemed like a world I once believed belonged only to others. Hydrangeas flowering, a shaded bench beneath a willow tree, and a koi pond sparkling in the sunlight like delicate glass. Ryan parked and switched off the engine, letting the silence settle. I stared at the entrance and softly admitted, "I am not ready." "For what?" he asked. "To want this," I answered. He said nothing but just nodded. That was what I appreciated about Ryan. He never tried to fill the quiet with sympathy or empty words. He understood some moments need room to breathe. We entered the main lobby, and that's when I noticed something. The place smelled of lemon zest and fresh-baked bread, not sterile or sorrowful, but alive. The receptionist, Emily, stood to welcome us, warm and genuine, but not overly sweet. "You must be Ruth," she said. Ryan had called ahead and mentioned I would be visiting today. "Welcome." I almost corrected her since visiting sounded so permanent, yet something deep inside urged, "Let it be." We explored the courtyard first. Ryan walked slowly beside me and let me set the rhythm. We passed a small library, a crafts room, and even a yoga class for seniors. I watched two elderly women laugh as they tried to roll their mats and realized they weren't being cared for. They were truly living and deciding for themselves. Each room was bathed in sunlight, every corner filled with choice and life. The hallway featured windows, yet no one glanced over anyone's shoulder, and nobody sought permission to step outside. When we arrived at the koi pond, I paused. The fish moved beneath the water's surface, smooth and aimless, as if they had no pressing destination. I used to sit by places like this when I needed to clear my mind. I mentioned this, saying, "Before all of this," and Gerald responded, "You still do." We stayed there quietly for a while. I said nothing, simply existing. For the first time in many months, I was not a problem for anyone to fix. I was not Emily's worry or Ryan's responsibility. I was simply Ruth. Eventually, we returned indoors, and Laya guided us to a peaceful tea room where she placed a tray before us. On it rested 2 cups, a small dish of lemon cookies, and a brochure. There was no insistence or pressure, only a kind gesture. Holding the warm cup with both hands, I focused on the brochure. It described the very thing Emily had advised me not even to think about: an apartment with a kitchenette and balcony, available on a month-to-month basis, no pressure to commit, ready immediately. Emily had once warned, "Do not get your hopes up. Places like that are for wealthy retirees, not people like you." I studied the contact information again. It was not affordable easily, but it was not out of reach either. Not if I regained control over my finances and my life. "I do not know if I can afford this," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Gerald sipped his tea and said, "Then let us find out. But first, you must file a paperwork, a financial protection order. I will assist you." The word protection struck deeply within me. Not because I was delicate, but because I needed to safeguard myself. Tired of pretending I did not need shielding from my own child, I glanced once more at the brochure, then at Gerald. "All right," I said, "let's begin." Just like that, I stepped into a new phase. Sitting at Gerald's kitchen table, I laid out everything I had left in my name. Insurance cards, old bank documents, a folder labeled Medicare that Emily once joked about for being so old-fashioned, and then a thin yellow notepad torn, in places where I had jotted down every suspicious incident I could recall. "I know it looks disorganized," I admitted, but I tried to keep track. Gerald adjusted his reading glasses. "Disorganized is fine. Truth often is." He scanned the first few pages, slowly nodding, noticing repeated charges from stores I did not frequent: a Netflix account named Ryan's Master and PayPal withdrawals at 3 a.m. "This is excellent, really excellent." I sat opposite him, my hands calmly folded. I no longer felt insignificant, just determined I had something unexpected proof. The bank card was missing, but my memory remained sharp, and now, looking back with clarity, the full picture emerged. Emily had taken control, supposedly out of love, but it was a calculated move, not affection. "Do you have access to a printer?" Gerald asked. I nodded, remembering Cliff's old study still connected to an ancient Dell computer. "Tomorrow, we will scan these documents," he said. "I will introduce you to a specialist in financial abuse. They are discreet and do more than recover bank funds. They create protection plans. We have been delayed, but action is necessary soon. Once Emily realizes you are not returning, she might attempt to take control quickly, especially if the accounts remain under her supervision." "They are," I said, "at least some of them." Regarding the house title, I hesitated. Gerald looked up. "It is registered in my name. Emily transferred it before my surgery, explaining it would ease the hospital paperwork." Gerald blinked and then reclined. "So, you mean the house she is residing in?" "Yes," I confirmed. He exhaled a sound almost like laughter. "Well, that certainly changes the situation." Standing up, he grabbed a small lockbox from the shelf behind him. Inside were official-looking forms with tabs protruding like teeth. "You must duplicate all your documents, every page notarized. Statements will help, especially if you can pinpoint the exact dates Emily withdrew money." "Even better," I agreed, already reaching for my notebook. My handwriting trembled, but my memory remained clear. "Should I call her and inform her of my filing?" I asked. "No," Gerald replied firmly. "Let the paperwork speak. It will convey the message far better than you ever could." That phrase lingered in my mind. Let the paperwork speak. Let it express the feelings I wanted to shout but never dared. Let it testify to the years of silent betrayal, the theft disguised as affection, the suffocating care used to manipulate. Let it reveal what I could not say. You tried to control me, but I held on to every receipt and record. That night, I meticulously scanned each page, organizing folders until the clock struck midnight. My back ached, my eyes burned, but I persisted because now was the moment to make everything clear. My purpose had grown beyond mere survival. I now carried a mission, and regardless of any apologies, the record would endure. It was for the attorneys, for the justice system, and most importantly, for myself, because finally I was documenting the truth on paper. They never imagined I would have the strength or time to reveal it. Emily was unaware I still possessed the deed. She never inquired nor considered it. She simply believed her temporary control over my life had turned permanent. Like everything else she quietly took possession of. When she pulled into the driveway 2 days later and found a stranger standing in her yard holding a clipboard, it must have felt like a disruption to the perfect order she had established, cracks appearing in her carefully constructed world. The visitor was a real estate agent, a woman named Carla whom I had spoken with just the previous day. She came recommended by Gerald's connections, professional, discreet, and not prone to gossip. Emily stepped out of her vehicle already fuming. I am certain I was not present. Instead, I was exactly where I needed to be. 3 towns over, sitting on the shaded balcony of my temporary apartment at Golden Pines. I held a glass of iced tea in one hand and an official property reassessment form in the other, which Gerald had delivered that morning. I did not have to be there to witness the confrontation. I just needed the documents to arrive first. Naturally, Emily called me, 3 calls straight to voicemail before I finally picked up on the 4th. "Mom, what on earth is happening? There's a realtor here inspecting my place." She said, "Your house is your home, no matter what." Then she added, "You ordered an evaluation." I paused for a full moment before answering with quiet certainty. Correct silence, then venom. "You cannot be serious." She replied, "I am very serious." And I could almost hear her pacing. "You do not even live here anymore. Is this some kind of guilt trip? Are you trying to shame me?" I responded calmly, "No, I am simply taking back what has always belonged to me. This is my home." She hissed, "No." I repeated firmly, "Yes. This is the place you have been occupying, managing with money that was never yours. I let you play the caretaker, but that responsibility is now revoked." She insisted, "You cannot just throw us out." I answered clearly, "I did not throw you out, Emily. You told me to leave." The silence that followed felt like soft yet heavy snowfall. She had no clue that I remembered everything. How the ownership had been transferred into my name under the pretense of helping with medical paperwork. How I signed the documents back without reading carefully, trusting her completely. But I did notice one important detail. One thing remained clear in my memory. I had never granted her full power of attorney, so legally and morally, the house has always been mine. Now it was being evaluated, prepared to be placed on the market, safe from her interference. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice low and cold. "You are being cruel." I did not argue or defend myself. Instead, I said one sentence that silenced her completely. "You only miss me now." I then ended the call. 30 minutes later, Carla sent me a message. Evaluation completed. Client Emily tried to interfere, but I stayed professional. The property shows strong potential for resale. We will follow up tomorrow. Ryan called later as well. She said he tried to reach me, he mentioned. He left a voicemail filled with threats. Let him threaten, I answered, because for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, I was not scared of his rage. I was not even angry myself anymore. I felt something far more intimidating, a certainty that love without respect is merely possession, a certainty that family means nothing if built on domination, a certainty that even if all I had left were this chair, this tea, and my name on a legal paper, I would remain freer than I ever was in that house. That night I went to bed early, and for the first time in years, I locked the door. Not because I dreaded what might come inside, but because I finally owned something worth protecting. The front doors at Golden Pines are glass, heavy yet stylish. You can see outside, but no one steps in without invitation. That is why I did not flinch when I noticed Emily arriving. That morning, I was sitting in the community library, absorbed in an article about elder financial exploitation that Ryan had highlighted for me. My tea sat beside me untouched, too bitter, but the words on the page burned even hotter. Then the front desk announced, "Your visitor, Alisa, is here," the receptionist said evenly. "Would you like her to come in?" I replied, "No, but you can tell her I am watching." No questions followed. The staff had encountered this before, children appearing only when their names were involved, not when they simply cared. I quietly slipped into the sunroom adjacent to the main lobby. From there, I could observe everything without being noticed. Emily stood in the foyer wearing tight jeans and a vibrant red blouse, pacing in small circles like a lion trapped in a cage. Her face showed pure disbelief, as if the atmosphere itself had personally offended her. The receptionist walked over to her again, and Emily pointed in my direction. The gesture was unmistakably sharp and accusatory. She had no idea I was hidden behind the tinted glass. For once, she was the one on the outside. I stepped back just enough to remain unseen, not out of fear, but by choice. It is a form of power that people like Emily rarely anticipate. The power not to confront, but to simply ignore. Around 10 minutes later, security appeared. They were neither loud nor aggressive, but carried an air of calm firmness. A woman dressed in a navy blazer with a name tag approached and spoke to Emily quietly. By then, Emily was wildly gesturing, her mouth moving far faster than any sense of irony she might have had. I watched as she pointed again, this time toward the brochure stand, the ceiling, maybe even the air itself, anything but inwardly. Eventually, she spun around and stormed through the doors, which slid shut behind her like the final punctuation mark. I returned to my seat in the library. The tea had grown cold, but it was irrelevant because I was no longer concerned. Later that afternoon, Gerald stopped in. I told him everything that had happened. "She made all this effort just to be turned away at the door," he said, shaking his head. "She must have been expecting a different version of you, one she imagined. In the earlier version, I spoke of the person who believed silence meant calmness, and he gave a slow nod. That version has slowly faded away. We stepped out into the garden side by side, and I carried a small tray holding 2 iced lemonades the employees had left for us. There was no need to explain what had transpired. They already understood. I made myself comfortable on the garden bench, the one I preferred the most, the one with ivy winding up its legs and a view of the koi pond just a few steps away. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around us. Emily had journeyed all that way, seeking perhaps control or maybe an admission or a turnaround. She ended up with nothing because I had nothing left to offer her. No remorse, no consent, not even my focus. The calm I experienced at that instant did not come from victory, but from the sound of footsteps fading away without a door left open behind them. I reached over and lightly squeezed Ryan's hand and whispered, "I don't think I'm afraid of her anymore." He smiled and said, "That means she's truly gone." 2 days later, Ryan called me shortly after breakfast and said, "It's time. Do you still want to sell the house?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. An hour later, he met me at Golden Pines carrying a file folder. Inside were the complete title documents, my notarized proof of identity, and a trust agreement blank, but prepared to secure everything Emily believed was hers. We sat on the sun porch with papers spread before us. "She's going to lose it," I said. Ryan grinned and replied, "Losing it means being fully revealed." I signed my name on the line. After finishing the signature on the line, Ryan would have teased me about how my tongue stuck out slightly when I concentrated. Yet this was not merely a sale. It felt like a complete severance. The house Emily once lived in and boasted about was never truly hers. She painted the walls and certainly purchased a sofa using my credit. I replaced the doorknobs and selected the tiles, but the very structure, the foundation, belonged to my name and always had. We quietly completed the trust paperwork to transfer the property into the Ruth Langley Irrevocable Living Trust. This was not out of fear of a lawsuit, but because I needed something unbreakable, something even a cunning daughter could not infiltrate. By the following day, the title had changed hands. Emily would remain unaware for now, but the law was informed. At the same time, I was taking further action. With help from a financial abuse expert Gerald introduced me to, I requested the freezing of all transactions linked to my original bank account. Every operation from the past 6 months would be scrutinized. The specialist inquired if I had supporting proof. I handed her 12 pages of my journal containing dates, details, and withdrawals. As she flipped through the pages, her eyebrows lifted progressively. She told me I was not just exploited, but harvested. I stayed composed since I already understood this fact, and now the law did too. Returning to Golden Pines, I felt an unusual lightness, not happiness yet, but something close to breath filling my lungs again, like I no longer had to hold everything back just to appear polite. In my room, I took out the envelope Ryan had given me the year before he passed away. I had never opened it. It rested at the bottom of my keepsake box, labeled in his handwriting, "Only open when you're tired of pretending you're okay." With hands shaking, I finally opened it. Inside was a short letter with just a few sentences. "Emily, if they ever make you feel smaller than the woman I married, do not argue or explain. Simply walk away. You do not owe anyone the right to dim your light. Use what is rightfully yours, and make sure it is never taken from you again." Beneath the note was an uncashed check for $10,000. I stared at it for a long time before bursting into a deep, aching laugh that hurt my ribs. He had known even then. Ryan had understood that the world, even family, could turn against you. I called Gerald. "Are you busy?" I asked. "I have been looking for you," he said. "Let's sell the house and set up a trust they cannot touch." He paused. "Are you ready for the consequences?" I looked around my room, sunlight flooding in, the koi pond shimmering, my bridge scarf draped on the chair. "Yes," I answered firmly, "because this time I am not reacting. I am reclaiming." I deposited the check that afternoon, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the world to know I was far from finished. Emily always believed she would have the last say. She counted on it. Her voice was louder, her messages longer, her threats cloaked in guilt and false concern. She thought silence meant surrender. So when the letter arrived, heavy with legal jargon and official stamps, I pictured her standing there, confident it would break me. She lingered at the doorway for quite some time before finally opening it, and when she did, the sound of the lock clicking shut echoed sharply without me needing to say a word. Inside that envelope lay the start of the downfall, a formal notice from the trust's legal advisor stating that immediately Emily Andrews was stripped of any rights to access accounts, property, or financial documents related to Ruth Langley. The message was brief and official, offering no blame or pleas, just clear boundaries. That was what infuriated her the most. She called me 7 times that day, each time unanswered. On the 8th attempt, she left a message saying, "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're choosing to believe him over your own daughter. Do you even realize what you're doing? You're destroying the family." She wielded that word as if it were a shield, as if it should erase all the hurt, manipulation, and betrayal. But family is not a protection, it's a privilege. And she lost it the minute she spilled hot coffee on my lap and blamed me for it. I forwarded her voicemail to Gerald just in case. Then I acted quietly, yet decisively. sending her nothing but a letter. No response or excuses followed. I allowed the letter to establish what I never could, a firm boundary delineated by law and consequences. She was unable to weep her way out of this. Gerald called that night. "She understood, didn't she?" he asked. "Oh yes, she did," I replied, sipping chamomile from my cherished chipped cup. "You always know, the moment they realize their control is gone?" He chuckled. "You didn't even flinch." "Why would I?" I said. "I've learned too well." I had already buried the version of myself that would have justified everything that night. I slept with the windows open, breathing in the scent of rain, and in my dreams, I was not hiding. Instead, I stood right in the center of that house, my house, holding a set of keys that I never handed over. Emily was nowhere to be seen. No shouting, no pleading, only distant echoes. The following morning, I discovered a small white envelope slipped beneath my door at Golden Pines. It was handwritten with no return address. I knew it was from her. I did not open it. I tore it apart and fed it straight into the shredder at the front desk because this time I was not curious. I no longer needed to hear her apologize, only to follow it with, "But I need." In this moment, I chose to trust the silence more than any words, recognizing that silence, when willingly embraced, holds its own form of power. Later that same afternoon, Gerald came by with several documents for me to examine: updates to the trust, a roster of protected accounts, and a few phone numbers in case I ever required direct contact with law enforcement or the trust officer. As I signed the final document, he looked up and said, "You realize you have achieved something many people never do." "What is that?" I asked. "You ended the cycle, not with a loud noise or a scream, but with a closed door and a clean name." I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since Cliff passed away, I allowed myself to believe I had finally come back home, to my true self. This moment unfolded on a Thursday, just after lunch, as the corridors of Golden Pines lay silent. The pines were still, and the sun cast a gentle golden glow over everything, just as it always did, right before the koi pond brightened up. I was seated on a garden bench with Marguerite, our hands resting on the same folded quilt between us. We had just finished our usual conversation about the bridge tournament schedule and how none of the new players shuffled the cards properly. Gerald was expected to join us shortly, and that is when I noticed Emily and Ryan walking up the curved brick path leading to the front entrance. Emily's pace was furious and hurried, while Ryan lagged behind, displaying that irritated slouch posture that always made my stomach churn even before I recalled the $5,000 coffee incident. They were clearly coming for a confrontation, but what they did not realize was that I had nothing left to lose. The security guard noticed them first. Doris, bless her keen eyes and steady composure, stepped out from behind the front desk before they even reached the door. I saw Emily gesturing wildly, pointing past Doris toward the back garden. Ryan shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and rolled his eyes in frustration. Doris stood her ground firmly. I did not stand up, did not run, I did not even flinch. Marguerite glanced toward the entrance and tensed. "Should I call Gerald?" "No," I said. "Let her see me calm." I wanted Emily to witness what tranquility looked like when it was not desperate for her approval. Eventually, she spotted me through the glass and moved forward to push past the desk. Doris intervened, and Emily raised her voice. I could not hear her words, but the tension was palpable. The look in his eyes was a blend of familiar fury and despair, a suffocating mix of rage. Control was slipping away from him. Ryan finally noticed me as well, his gaze locked with mine. For a fleeting moment, I saw something different. Not guilt, not love, but panic. It wasn't because he missed me, but because the money had disappeared, and I was no longer going to be exploited. Doris raised her hand and then pointed firmly back toward the parking lot. Emily threw up her arms in frustration. Ryan muttered something under his breath and turned away. Fine. Let the boy take the lead this time. Emily stayed still for a moment longer, her arms rigid at her sides, face pale with anger, and her lips trembling ever so slightly. She mouthed the word, "Mom." But I didn't move, did not wave, did not stand up. I remained seated on that bench, holding Marjorie's hand, wrapped in the same old quilt Cliff used to lay over my shoulders whenever I fell asleep on the couch during Jeopardy reruns. They left. I watched until only faint shadows lingered on the driveway, until the engine's rumble faded as the car drove away, a car that once felt like it carried my entire life inside it. Marjorie exhaled deeply. "You didn't even blink," she whispered. I smiled softly. I had already said goodbye. They were only just realizing it now. Later, Gerald arrived carrying a bag of scones and a small bouquet plucked from his garden. I told him everything that had happened. He nodded with understanding. "They will try again," I said, "but I won't let them." That night I wrote in my journal, "When they came with anger, I stayed with peace." That is how you know. It ends when you no longer feel the need to shout back. I tore the page out and slipped it into a small frame on the nightstand by my bed, because the next time they come searching for a reaction, all they will see is their own reflection from the other side of a locked door. 2 days later, a small ivory envelope arrived, addressed in flowing handwriting, dropped into the mailbox at Golden Pines. The penmanship was unmistakable, perfect cursive, tilting just enough to seem elegant. Emily's. I stared at it for a full minute, not because I was unsure of its contents, but precisely because I knew. Marjorie spotted me standing frozen in the lobby, a letter in one hand and a coffee in the other. She asked, "Want me to open it for you?" I shook my head. "No, I don't want anyone else to witness this lie." I didn't open it there. Instead, I took it upstairs and placed it carefully on the small writing desk where Ryan used to sit. Then I waited until the sunlight hit the far window, just as it used to when I helped him with taxes and letters to his comrades from the war. I took a deep breath and opened the letter. The first word was "Mom," not "dear," not "sorry," just "Mom," as if she still held that right. The opening paragraph was exactly what I anticipated: hesitant attempts at regret, explanations of how things spiraled out of control, assurances that she never intended to make me feel abandoned. She described how everything happened so swiftly and used the word misunderstanding like a patch to cover the wounds. Then came the true purpose of her letter on the third line. "We're struggling now. Bills are piling up. Ryan did not." After all, I did not meet the criteria for the car loan. There it was, the usual request followed by an apology. It was merely a trap, something I was supposed to accept without question, because I used to. Long ago, I had believed in giving second chances without any proof, but that woman no longer existed. I was no longer the person who let Emily rearrange her mail and call it kindness. I was not the one who muted every instinct simply to preserve peace. I had come to terms with a different reality now, understanding that not all daughters bring blessings, some serve as warnings. The letter concluded with the words, "Maybe we can talk? I really miss you." We all do. I shut the page and looked at the envelope once more. It was thick, as though something extra had been enclosed. I reached inside and found it. A personal check, made out to me from one of the joint accounts Ryan had once established to streamline things. The check was uncashed and had a slightly torn corner. The amount, $3,500, was noted in the memo for car repairs. I had not written it, but my name was printed clearly. She must have kept it, or perhaps forged it, or both. I did not need to know which. All I understood was that this was not a peace offering, but bait, dangled with a fake tear and a signed name I knew all too well. I folded the check repeatedly until it vanished into my palm like every empty promise she had ever made. Without hesitation, I took it directly to the shredder. No words, no reaction, just paper turning to dust. I left the envelope open on my desk and let it remain there like a carcass, a reminder that not every letter deserves a response. Later that afternoon, Gerald stopped by. With his customary lemon cake, he noticed it and lifted one brow. She attempted again. I handed him the leftover half of the letter. He read it without a word, then returned it. He still thinks you are an easy target. Not anymore, I replied. That evening I did not write in my journal because the sentence was already clear in my mind. I did not care about your intentions. Your actions were enough. The phone call arrived just after sunrise. I was awake early, watching the koi fish glide through the morning fog with a steaming cup of hot water nearby. Gerald's tone was composed but resolute. The trust had flagged yet another fraudulent check from the same account, bearing the same signature, yet you did not write it. I am aware, I said. She sent me one last week. There was a brief pause. Well, he continued, the bank is aware now, too. It appeared Emily had made one final attempt to access my old accounts, but this time the trust safeguards shut firmly, and the bank had undeniable evidence. Withdrawals, signatures, emails from her internet address, even a voicemail she left for a bank official, inquiring about her mother's account balance, as if she still held any claim to my identity. She was anything but subtle. She was desperate. Gerald went on. The financial abuse expert has submitted a report to the Elder Protection Unit, and investigators are currently reviewing it. My chest did not feel tight. Instead, it expanded because I finally recognized that I had not only escaped, but had ingeniously set a trap. Several hours later, 2 unmarked officers arrived at Golden Pines. They did not come for Emily, but to conduct a calm, polite interview with me. One of them took notes while the other questioned me about my records, my diary, and the details of my withdrawals. I handed over copies of everything, all carefully itemized and highlighted. I was prepared. When they left, the younger officer said, "You are not the first, Mrs. Langley, but you are one of the few who noticed it soon enough." I nearly interrupted him to say it was not early, but rather timely enough. By midday, I had confirmation that Emily was being investigated for financial wrongdoing, elder abuse, and falsification. Ryan was named in at least one suspicious transaction as well. I did not celebrate, nor did I grieve. I sat quietly in the garden, reflecting on every time she had told me, "You are lucky to have me," while reshaping my entire existence to suit her needs. She always treated me like a locked door she already possessed the keys to, never imagining I would change the locks. Later that afternoon, Marjorie came by with fresh banana bread and 2 mugs of ginger tea. Everyone at Golden Pines knew by now, not because I had told them, but because they had witnessed the storm approach and saw me remain calm through it all. "Do you think she will be arrested?" Marjorie asked softly. "I do not know," I replied, "and it is no longer my decision." That was what freedom tasted like, not revenge, but distance. Emily had already lost the one thing she could never fake or reclaim: control. Control over me, my identity, my thoughts, and my life. She did not simply lose money. She lost the entire game. Because when you bet on someone's silence and they finally find their voice, everything changes. That was the moment I understood I had never truly been winning. Later that evening, Ryan and I sat on the back porch beneath a vast navy sky. He poured us each a small glass of wine and said, "She underestimated you at every turn." I answered, "I underestimated myself as well." He lifted his glass to toast to new calculations. We clinked our glasses together, and I spoke words I had not voiced in years, but now felt undeniably real. I am safe, not only from Emily, but also from the urge to justify myself to anyone who ever believed my kindness was weakness. That night, I fell asleep with the window open once more. When the wind stirred, it did not sound like a warning, but like applause.